Since the dawn of time, there was the screenplay. I'm just kidding, guys. Welcome to Screenplay or Bust, your one-stop shop for all things movies. Today we'll be continuing the Screenplay series as we cover the history of the screenplay in 7 minutes. We as humans have been telling stories since the dawn of time, from cave paintings to the dramas of antiquity, to Shakespeare, and to those who have told their story through the spoken word and everything in between. However, the invention of the moving picture required a new written medium for a new age of entertainment. Enter the screenplay. In fact, the screenplay as we know it has undergone many changes since its inception. And these changes can be broken down into 5 key eras. These eras being the silent era, the era of sound, the era of standardization, the spec script era, and the digital era. In the silent era, early films were without sound, therefore leaving out the need for dialogue, an essential part of any screenplay. The screenplay as we know it, in its infancy, consisted of a mixture of setting details and story directions. With early screenplays and their incomplete forms, it is up for debate what the first true screenplay was. But many historians consider George Méliès' 1902 film A Trip to the Moon to be one of the first. Méliès' script still didn't contain the modern elements found in scripts and was mainly screen directions rather than a step-by-step screenplay. However, the film's contribution to the early genre of screenplay writing isn't its only claim to fame. The film is also viewed as one of the first science fiction films, as the film is largely inspired by Jules Verne's novel From the Earth to the Moon. So before we move on, let's put this into context. The first motion picture, or rather moving picture, emerged in 1878 with Edward Muybridge's The Horse in Motion. That means the first screenplay emerged 24 years after the first moving picture and 123 years from today. Happy birthday, screenplay! You don't look a day over 100. Then with the emergence of sound, or as they were called during that time, talkies. Talkies. Is it talkies or talkies? I feel like I'm saying that wrong. Talkies. It's talkies, right? Anyway, let's get back on track. The screenplay became more complex, adding dialogue and eventually evolving into what we know today as the modern screenplay. This can be shown as the company Greenlight Coverage writes, screenwriters began incorporating structured dialogue, reshaping the landscape of storytelling. Dialogue was now as crucial as visual elements in driving the narrative forward. As a result, scripts required clear instruction on sound elements, along with traditional scene depictions, which led to more detailed and structured screenplay formats. And it is these structured screenplay formats that led into the era of standardization. This era can be considered the catalyst that caused the consolidation of a uniform screenplay format. This is echoed in Stephen Price's book, A History of a Screenplay, when he writes, "Prior to the Paramount case of 1948, there is less consistency in screenwriting than might be expected. The screenplay is something of a hybrid of master scenes and shots, and there are many inconsistencies and varying approaches, both between studios and within individual scripts." The Paramount case of 1948 of course refers to the United States Supreme Court case that used antitrust laws to break up movie studios' exclusive control of movie theaters and force them to sell their ownership of said theaters. But that's a story for another day. Regardless, it is this ruling that set a new precedent that reshaped the 5 major and 3 minor movie studios, and in doing so altered them on a fundamental level, with screenplay format also being included. The screenplay remained largely unchanged for many decades, with a few minor changes here and there until the late 20th century. It was within this decade that screenplays that were normally written by a team of writers at a studio shifted in the hands of the people. That shift was the spec script. Spec script, which is short for speculative script, is a screenplay that is uncommissioned by a studio and is written by a screenwriter solely by their own motivation, without the promise of being sold to a studio or even being produced. Now, in all fairness, the first spec script was initially sold in 1933 in the form of Preston Sturges' The Power and the Glory, which is based on a 1940 novel. However, this evolution in screenwriting did not fully catch on until the late 1960s and early 1970s, therefore making it deserving of its own era. This was largely marked by a slow yet steady integration into the Hollywood system as more spec scripts began to be made into movies. The magic of the spec script is that it allowed up-and-coming screenwriters to showcase their talent and craft in a way they never were before. Movies for the people, by the people. This, of course, finally leads us to the digital era. This is the era that we find ourselves in presently, and it is rich with possibility. It bears with it all of the potential of the previous eras, and all of the advancements of the modern era we live in. Truth be told, I could probably speak on this for a while, but I think it would be better if I turn it over to an excerpt of Sid Field's Screenplay, The Foundations of Screenwriting. This is one of the essential screenplay books, and there will be a future video on that soon, so stay tuned. Field writes, "It's clear that a whole new computer-savvy generation who grew up with interactive software, digital storytelling, and editing applications sees things in a more visual way and is thus able to express it in a more cinematic style. But when all is said and done, the principles of screenwriting don't change. They are the same no matter in what time or place or era we live in. Great films are timeless. They embody and capture the time in which they were made. The human condition is the same now as it was then." The digital era is built on accessibility and visuals and is spurred on by the technology that allows us to write screenplays on our laptops and shoot movies on our phones. But at the end of the day, it's the story that matters. It's the story and screenplays that last through the generations. And as always, if that's the case, it really is screenplay or bust. Thanks for tuning in, folks. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for notifications. This has been Screenplay or Bust. I'll see you next week.